Hello, wonderful viewers of Sci-fi Stories, and thank you from the bottom of our hearts for tuning in today. Unfortunately, YouTube has recently disabled our channel's monetization, leaving us without the funds to keep operating and paying our hardworking team. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or clicking the link in the description. And comment so we can continue bringing these universes to life for you. The Valorian Empire had extinguished 1,000 suns and cracked the magnetic hearts of 1,000,000 worlds. When their armada pierced the frozen edge of the Oort cloud, they expected what they always found. They anticipated terror, desperate pleas, and the delightful silence of a dying species. They certainly did not expect a tired mechanic chewing peppermint gum in the dark. Deep space was not simply empty. It was heavily, suffocatingly quiet. It pressed against the hulls of ships like a physical weight. Piercing through that crushing blackness came the vanguard of the Valorian Empire. 5,000 obsidian dreadnoughts glided in perfect formation, moving like leviathans of pitch-black iron through an ocean of starlight. They were an ancient, ravenous civilization, a galactic plague that specialized in drilling into planetary mantles and bleeding out their magnetic cores until the worlds shattered into dust. Earth to them was not a sovereign world. It was simply the next meal on a very long banquet table. Standing on the command deck of the flagship Supreme Commander Kalen stared at the holographic projection of the Sol system. His armor, crafted from the dying stars of his home galaxy, hummed with dark energy. His golden eyes gleamed with absolute, unshakable confidence. The native inhabitants of this blue marble had barely scratched the surface of interstellar travel. They possessed no energy shields, no massive dreadnoughts, and no unified defense grid that a Valorian sensor could even detect. To Kalen, the human race was a young, fragile weed, growing over a vast, untapped gold mine. He intended to rip that weed out by the roots and process the soil. Meanwhile, roughly 238,000 miles away from Earth, cloaked in the pitch-black shadow of the far side of the moon, Billy Baxter was busy ignoring the end of the world. Billy was a veteran orbital engineer, a man woven from grease calluses, and a thoroughly American brand of stubborn pragmatism. He wore a faded, battered extravehicular suit that had seen more asteroid dust than a modern mining drone. Floating weightless outside a dilapidated, rusted satellite station, officially designated as the Old Anchor, Billy grunted as he locked a heavy wrench onto a stubborn bolt. He chewed his peppermint gum with a slow, methodical rhythm. The absolute silence of the void howled around him, but Billy only focused on the tension of the cold metal beneath his thick, reinforced gloves. He gave the wrench one final violent tug. The bolt locked into place with a satisfying heavy clunk that vibrated through the soles of his magnetic boots. Back in the inner solar system, the Earth Council was putting on a magnificent show of total, unadulterated panic. Across the tactical displays of the Valorian fleet, Kalen watched with cruel amusement as human vessels scrambled like frightened insects under a magnifying glass. Every civilian transport, every mining skiff, and every pathetic military frigate the humans owned was frantically retreating, pulling back into extremely low Earth orbit. They huddled together against their fragile atmosphere, broadcasting terrified, unencrypted signals that the Valorian intelligence officers easily absorbed. It painted a perfect, flawless illusion of a fractured, terrified species trembling in the dark, waiting for the executioner to swing his blade. Automated warning buoys scattered across the Kuiper Belt by the humans, decades ago, began pinging the encroaching armada. The mechanical voices broadcasted a repeating message in standard galactic frequencies. Warning! You are entering restricted human space. Alter your trajectory immediately or face severe consequences. Kalen sneered, waving a slender, clawed hand to dismiss the audio feed. Severe consequences from a species that still relied on chemical thrusters for their cargo ships. It was an outright insult to his intelligence and his lineage. He turned to his navigation officers, his voice dripping with ancient arrogance. "Ignore their pathetic automated buoys," Kalen commanded, loudly ensuring every officer on the deck heard his decree. "Divert all auxiliary power to the main plasma thrusters. Spin up the dark matter drives. We will accelerate to light speed and shatter their miserable orbital defenses in a single glorious strike. Let them burn in the fire of their own broken ships." The 5,000 pitch-black dreadnoughts hummed with apocalyptic energy, their massive engines glowing like angry red wounds against the backdrop of the cosmos. They prepared to leap forward to cross the vast distance in the blink of an eye and turn Earth into a burning graveyard. Back on the dark side of the moon, Billy Baxter did not run. He did not scramble for an escape pod, nor did he retreat to a fortified bunker. He slowly pulled his wrench away from the hull, inspected the gleaming metal edge, and holstered it carefully on his tool belt. He floated back toward the main access panel of the old anchor, a station that the rest of the galaxy assumed was nothing more than a piece of floating forgotten garbage orbiting a dead rock. Billy reached out with a heavy glove and flipped open a protective casing that was flaking gray paint into the vacuum. Beneath it sat an incredibly old mechanical toggle switch. There were no sleek holographic interfaces here. There were no biometric scanners or glowing touchscreens. Just a heavy, archaic metal switch. He blew a bubble with his gum, let it pop quietly inside his helmet, and pushed the switch upward with a solid thud. Deep beneath the lunar crust and buried silently in the deep mantles of Mars, Venus, and Mercury, a hidden network of ancient, incomprehensible machinery woke up. The trap was set. Humanity was not trembling. Humanity was waiting. The dark matter drives engaged with a roar that should have ruptured the fabric of the universe itself. The Valorian armada surged forward, a tidal wave of annihilation aimed straight at the inner planets, intending to cross the distance in a fraction of a heartbeat. As they aggressively crossed the invisible threshold of Jupiter's orbit, the impossible happened. At speeds approaching the absolute limit of the physical universe, the 5,000 dreadnoughts hit a wall that was entirely non-existent. There was no cataclysmic impact. There was no shattering of dark iron hulls or buckling of ancient armor. Instead, their forward momentum was simply and utterly consumed. The terrifying kinetic energy of the Grand Fleet bled away into the void in the span of 3 agonizing seconds. Supreme Commander Kalen stumbled, his claws gouging into the command console to keep his balance. The inertial dampeners screamed throughout the ship, struggling desperately to compensate for a deceleration that defied all known mechanics. They were trapped in what felt like invisible cosmic molasses. The vacuum of space itself had developed an aggressive friction coefficient. Every thruster burned at maximum capacity, vomiting dark matter exhaust into the dark, yet the massive ships remained suspended, locked perfectly in place, relative to the swirling storms of the massive gas giant looming nearby. On the bridge, the holographic tactical displays shattered into violent static before rebooting in safe mode. The chief science officer, a scarred veteran of 100 planetary conquests, frantically manipulated his crystalline console. "Supreme Commander, our chronometers are desynchronizing rapidly," he shouted, his voice laced with an unfamiliar, deeply unsettling tremor. "The ambient temperature outside the hull is stable, but molecular motion is grinding to a halt. It is not a thermal freeze." The officer looked up, his golden eyes wide with a creeping existential horror. "It is a temporal freeze. The local flow of time itself is stagnating around us." Outside the thick armored viewports, the starlight began to shift and sicken. The distant pinpricks of foreign suns stretched and warped, smearing into elongated streaks of violet and ultraviolet radiation. The fabric of reality around the fleet was physically thickening, solidifying into an inescapable, invisible prison. The mighty Valorian engines pushed with the force of dying stars, and yet they gained absolutely zero distance. Far from the chaotic panic of the alien flagship, Billy Baxter had retreated into the pressurized, cramped control booth of the old anchor. He had stripped off his heavy extravehicular helmet, revealing a mess of graying hair and a face deeply lined by decades of hard orbital labor. He kicked his heavy magnetic boots up onto the main diagnostic console, leaned back in a battered leather chair that squeaked loudly in the confined space, and took a slow, deliberate sip from a dented thermos of thick, scalding black coffee. On his primary monitor, rendered in harsh, outdated green wireframe graphics, the Grand Valorian Armada was nothing more than a massive cluster of motionless data points. "Well now," Billy muttered to himself in the quiet hum of the station, taking another slow sip of the bitter brew. "Would you look at that? Stuck tight like a bunch of fat flies in a giant block of amber." He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound of pure amusement. He had spent 15 grueling years maintaining this hidden network, enduring endless bureaucratic red tape and severe budget cuts, and seeing it work flawlessly on the first try was a profoundly satisfying experience. Humanity might not build the prettiest ships he thought, but they certainly knew how to lay a bear trap. Back on the flagship, humiliation burned hot and furious in Kalen's chest, overriding his tactical sense and centuries of disciplined training. This had to be a trick, a pathetic, elaborate illusion cast by a desperate prey animal, backed into a corner. "Divert all auxiliary power to the forward weapon batteries," Kalen roared, his voice echoing off the obsidian bulkheads with lethal intent. "Target the empty space dead ahead. If they have erected an invisible barrier, we will shatter it into a million pieces. Fire the heavy plasma cannons." The flagship shuddered violently as the massive dorsal cannons charged. Blinding torrents of superheated plasma, capable of boiling an ocean dry in mere seconds, erupted from the weapon ports. For a fraction of a second, Kalen felt a familiar surge of destructive triumph. Then the fundamental laws of physics officially filed a resignation letter. The brilliant columns of destructive energy did not strike an energy shield. They did not dissipate into the freezing void. Instead, roughly 10 miles ahead of the fleet, the plasma beams encountered a severe fold in reality. The deadly beams gracefully curved upward, tracing a perfect, impossible mathematical arc, and looped completely backward. The Valorian bridge crew watched in absolute paralyzed silence as their own apocalyptic weapons, fire circled around and harmlessly dissipated into localized energy sinks that the humans had specifically designed to catch them. The beams formed beautiful glowing halos of harmless light around the stranded dreadnoughts, a cosmic mockery of their firepower. The grim truth of humanity's true defense line finally dawned on the alien invaders, shattering their ancient arrogance. Earth had not wasted its precious resources building colossal glowing energy shields or conventional planetary defense cannons. Shields could be overloaded by superior numbers. Cannons could be outgunned by larger fleets. Humanity, entirely aware of their severe disadvantage in a straight firefight, had chosen a radically different, utterly terrifying path. They had weaponized geometry itself. Utilizing a deeply classified technique known strictly as space-time folding, human engineers had spent the last 50 years subtly manipulating the gravitational topography of the solar system. They had not built a wall to keep enemies out. They had built an infinite labyrinth. The space between the outer planets and Earth was no longer flat or linear. It was folded, twisted, and looped in upon itself in 4 dimensions. Any vessel attempting to cross this space without the proper, constantly shifting localized navigational keys would find its thrust feeding into endless recursive loops. Kinetic energy was instantly redirected. Time was deliberately bottlenecked. The more power the Valorians applied to their engines, the tighter the invisible amber held them. The solar system was not a fortified castle. It was a perfectly designed, inescapable physical maze, and the greatest empire in the galaxy had just driven their entire fleet straight into a dead end. The command deck of the flagship was a theater of absolute chaos when the final, unbearable humiliation arrived. The Valorian communications array protected by quantum encryption algorithms that had never been broken in a billion years of conquest simply ceased to belong to them. It was not a battle of firewalls. The human signal did not pick the lock. It simply ripped the door off its heavy hinges. Every primary monitor, every holographic projector, and every tactical display on the alien bridge violently flickered and forcibly synced to a single incoming broadband frequency. A column of harsh, unfiltered light materialized right in the center of the command deck, directly in front of Supreme Commander Kalen. The projection stabilized, resolving into a crystal-clear three-dimensional image of a human. There were no ceremonial robes. There were no grand planetary banners or trembling diplomats begging for a treaty. It was just an older man in a bulky, aggressively utilitarian extravehicular hazard suit. The thick canvas material was heavily stained with dark grease and orbital lubricant. He had a smudge of dirt across his forehead, and his jaw moved in a slow, rhythmic chewing motion. In his right hand, he casually cradled a dented metal thermos, from which a thin wisp of steam drifted upward. He looked less like a legendary soldier facing down a galactic armada, and more like a weary mechanic annoyed by an unexpected plumbing leak. The human did not offer a polite greeting. He did not introduce himself or ask for the alien commander by name. His voice, transmitted with perfect, chilling clarity through the flagship speakers, was entirely devoid of fear, awe, or respect. Listen closely, because I am only going to say this once. Billy Baxter said, his tone as flat and cold as the dark side of the moon. You have exactly 60 seconds to power down your entire weapons grid, disable your primary propulsion drives, and broadcast an unconditional surrender on all open frequencies. If you do not comply, you and your entire fleet will be permanently erased from the map of the known universe. For a moment, the sheer audacity of the demand suspended the breath of every alien officer on the bridge. Then, Supreme Commander Kalen threw his head back and let out a sharp, mocking bark of laughter. His golden eyes flared with a mixture of profound insult and murderous rage. "A cheap, pathetic holographic trick," Kalen spat, stepping right up to the edge of the projection. "You think you can intimidate the absolute might of Valoria with parlor tricks and empty words. You are a dying species screaming in a cage you cannot escape. Science officer, ignore this localized hallucination. Force the dark energy cores to maximum capacity. Override the safety protocols and tear an emergency spatial rift. We will jump out of this pathetic gravitational trap and scorch their entire world from a safe distance." The human, in the projection, did not argue. He did not raise his voice to shout over the chaotic alarms or the blustering threats of the alien warlord. Billy simply took another slow sip from his thermos, swallowed, and casually shifted his weight. He lifted his left arm, pulling back the heavy grease-stained sleeve to reveal a battered mechanical watch strapped to his wrist. "You have 30 seconds left, pal," Billy stated with brutal indifference, his eyes locked on the face of the watch. "You are wasting your window." "Spool the cores to 100% capacity," Kalen roared, his voice cracking with fury. "Tear the fabric of this wretched system apart." Billy sighed a long, heavy sound that conveyed nothing but utter, exhausted disappointment. He lowered his wrist. "Suit yourself." Without another word, Billy Baxter raised his right hand, the one heavily padded in reinforced Kevlar and rubber, and deliberately snapped his fingers. The sharp sound echoed loudly through the comms channel. Nothing exploded. No grand laser beams shot out from the void to strike the ships. But outside the armored viewports, the universe fundamentally broke. The Valorian sensor officers began screaming. Their crystalline consoles flared with blinding warning lights registering gravitational anomalies that defied every known law of astrophysics. Jupiter, the massive gas giant looming in the near distance, possessed dozens of moons orbiting its massive body. In the exact fraction of a second that the human snapped his fingers, nearly 40, of those moons simply ceased to exist in their natural orbits. Io Europa, Ganymede Callisto, and dozens of smaller rocky satellites were violently snatched from reality. Trillions upon trillions of tons of solid rock, subterranean oceans, and boiling magma vanished without a single trace of propulsion, without any thermal energy signature, and without any warning whatsoever. Absolute panic erupted on the bridge as the sensors frantically searched for the missing celestial bodies. They found them almost immediately. Deep space telemetry registered a massive, horrifying gravitational disturbance. Light years away, pushed far out beyond the edges of the local star system. The displaced moons had been forcibly teleported across the cosmos. They had not been destroyed. They had been precisely dragged across the absolute vacuum and parked in a flat, utterly unnatural two-dimensional plane. The Valorian visual scanners zoomed in on the distant coordinates, broadcasting the image directly to the main view screen behind the human hologram. The chief science officer fell to his knees, his hands trembling violently over his console. He ran the telemetry data 3 times, desperate to prove it was merely a sophisticated optical illusion. But the gravitational displacement was real. The mass readings were real. The sheer unfathomable amount of energy required to instantaneously transport that much physical matter across such a vast distance was beyond anything their empire had ever theorized, let alone achieved. The massive planetary bodies had been arranged in a perfect glowing line. Their immense gravitational pulls were artificially stabilized, locked in place, by forces the aliens could not even begin to comprehend. The moons formed a colossal, undeniable sentence, written perfectly in the ancient, sacred runic script of the Valorian language. A warning spelled out with entire worlds burning brightly against the infinite black. Surrender or become dust. A dead, suffocating silence slammed down over the command deck, heavy enough to crush bone and stop hearts. The tactical officers stopped shouting. The engineering crew froze motionless at their stations. Even Supreme Commander Kalen stumbled backward, his face entirely draining of color, his golden eyes wide with a pure primal terror he had never known in his long, brutal life of conquest. The realization washed over the Grand Fleet like a tidal wave of freezing water. The humans were not hiding behind energy shields. They were not relying on missiles, plasma cannons, or desperate military tactics. The Valorian Empire was not engaging a military force at all. They had unknowingly walked into the territory of beings who could manipulate the very fabric of reality, picking up moons and rearranging them like decorative pebbles in an afternoon garden. The humans were not simply defending their home. They were casually playing God, and the Empire had just run out of time. The sheer impossible reality of the reshuffled moons shattered whatever fragile remnants remained of Kalen's ancient, aristocratic composure. The golden glow in his eyes, once a terrifying symbol of absolute predatory confidence, dissolved completely into the frantic, hyperventilating terror of a trapped animal. He was no longer a legendary warrior facing down a technologically inferior army. He was a helpless insect staring up at the descending boot of an angry god. The 60-second countdown was not a negotiation tactic. It was a definitive death sentence, and the timer had just bled out its final, agonizing drop. If the glorious Valorian Empire was destined to be permanently erased from the cosmos today, the Supreme Commander resolved with a mad, fanatic fury to drag this entire, wretched logic-defying solar system into the fiery abyss alongside them. "Initiate the Omega Protocol," Kalen screamed, his voice shattering into a hysterical, unrecognizable shriek that physically tore his throat. He lunged wildly at the primary command console, shoving his paralyzed, trembling science officer violently to the grated floor. Overload the dark matter containment fields. Every single one of them. Link the synchronization grid across all 5,000 dreadnoughts. Bypass every safety limiter and force the fusion cores to collapse inward. We will deliberately breach the singularity threshold and detonate the cores simultaneously. If we must die in this frozen trap, we will ignite an artificial supernova that will consume their yellow sun, vaporize their pathetic rocky planets, and incinerate every miserable human soul hiding in this cursed labyrinth. Across the frozen vacuum of folded space, 5,000 massive engines began to scream in unison. The pitch black, heavily armored hulls of the fleet glowed with a sickening, violent violet hue as their fundamental safety protocols were violently purged. The sheer volume of localized destructive energy pooling within the designated area was genuinely apocalyptic. It was enough power to crack the underlying fabric of space-time itself. The fleet was aggressively preparing to birth an expanding, unstoppable sphere of absolute annihilation, a blast wave of pure plasma and dark matter that would easily vaporize Earth before the intense light of the explosion even reached its fragile blue atmosphere. The human countdown officially hit zero. Inside the cramped, aggressively humming confines of the old Anchor orbital station, Billy Baxter casually swallowed the last lukewarm drop of his bitter black coffee. He sat perfectly still, watching the massive, catastrophic energy spikes registering violently on his archaic green diagnostic monitor. The alien fleet was actively, intentionally turning itself into the largest cosmic bomb in recorded galactic history. Billy did not flinch. He did not break into a cold sweat, nor did he panic and radio Earth High Command for emergency permission to retaliate. He simply breathed out a long, exhausted sigh, reached out with a heavy, grease-stained finger, and firmly tapped a glowing blue mechanical key designated in the human defense grid as the quantum reflection mirror. "Well, you absolutely cannot say I did not warn you," Billy muttered quietly to the empty metallic room. The detonation command was flawlessly executed across the entire Valorian fleet. Trillions of terawatts of unstable dark energy surged outward from the engine cores, blindly seeking to consume, expand, and destroy everything within a billion-mile radius. But the universe aggressively pushed back. Humanity had not simply folded local space to geographically trap the invading fleet. Human quantum physicists had actively, maliciously rewritten the fundamental mathematical constants of the local sector. As the massive apocalyptic waves of explosive energy attempted to breach the thick hulls of the dreadnoughts, they violently collided with an invisible, localized mathematical mirror permanently embedded in the quantum field. Instead of expanding outward into the freezing vacuum of space, the vectors of the explosive force were instantly, mathematically inverted. The explosive pressure blindly seeking to break out and consume the solar system was violently forced to reflect entirely inward upon itself. The universe simply stubbornly refused to allow the catastrophic energy to expand. The 5,000 colossal dreadnoughts did not explode. They imploded with a horrifying absolute and completely silent finality. The apocalyptic supernova energy was sucked violently back into the very engine cores that had desperately birthed it. The dark matter drives originally engineered over centuries to conquer whole galaxies instantly collapsed into microscopic, hyper-dense, localized gravity wells. In a mere fraction of a single heartbeat, the massive, terrifying warships were completely transformed from invincible instruments of galactic terror into isolated, inescapable energy prisons. The furious, unchecked energy, fed entirely upon itself, locked forever in an eternal, localized feedback loop that could never physically breach the outer hull. Then, the true visual spectacle of humanity's counterattack truly began. Stripped entirely of their internal structural integrity by the inverted looping gravitational forces, the ancient, virtually indestructible obsidian armor of the Valorian fleet began to fundamentally unravel at the subatomic quantum level. It was not a violent, fiery shattering. It was a breathtaking, terrifyingly peaceful, cosmic dissolution. The physical matter that composed the 5,000 invincible warships began to gently break down into basic, completely harmless photons and drifting elemental dust. Massive plasma cannons, heavy, reinforced armor plating, and intricate billion-year-old alien technology simply dissolved before the eyes of the crew, instantly turning into millions of cascading streams of shimmering, beautiful light. It looked exactly like a magnificent glittering meteor shower, blooming majestically across the pitch-black canvas of the cosmos. The newly formed light particles drifted aimlessly through the void, glowing with soft, ethereal blues, radiant golds and gentle purples, now utterly devoid of any kinetic energy or destructive potential. Inside the rapidly dissolving ships, the transition was equally bloodless, absolute, and utterly terrifying. The internal life support systems, the artificial gravity plating, and the massive power grids all simply ceased to possess physical form, converting instantly into harmless ambient light. Yet, by a stroke of deliberate chilling human engineering, the biological matter of the alien crew was entirely spared by the quantum filtering algorithms. The Valorian soldiers were left floating helplessly in the icy vacuum, safely protected from the freezing void only by sudden, localized atmospheric stasis bubbles generated by the residual energy of the very weapons they had just tried to use. Not a single drop of Valorian blood was spilled in the vast emptiness of space. There were absolutely no fiery explosions to light up the dark, no tragic screams echoing over the ruined communications channels, and no jagged debris fields of twisted burning metal left behind to clean up. The most feared, most heavily armed, and most ruthlessly efficient armada in the entire history of the known universe was comprehensively stripped of its weapons, its mobility, and its ancient pride, without a single human casualty. The fundamental laws of physics had simply been officially revoked, aggressively rewritten, and weaponized against them. Supreme Commander Kalen fell heavily onto the disappearing grated floor of the command deck, his armored knees completely buckling under the crushing psychological weight of an unfathomable, impossible defeat. The main tactical view screen directly above him flickered weakly and died, rapidly dissolving into the exact same glittering, harmless cosmic dust that was currently consuming his invincible, glorious flagship. The red emergency warning lights faded into total consuming darkness, leaving him entirely illuminated only by the gentle, hauntingly beautiful glow of his disintegrating empire. He stared blankly into the mesmerizing cosmic light show surrounding him, his strategic mind completely broken by the sheer terrifying scale of the human deception. The frantic, terrified human civilian transport ships hastily retreating to low Earth orbit. The pathetic, seemingly useless automated warning buoys broadcasting their hollow threats. The rusty, totally obsolete orbital engineering stations hiding quietly in the dark shadows of dead moons. It had all been an elaborate, incredibly convincing, and perfectly executed stage play. Earth was absolutely not a fragile, terrified prey animal, hiding desperately in the dark cosmic woods. Earth was not a soft, vulnerable target, ripe for the plundering. Earth was a meticulously crafted, mathematically perfect spiderweb, woven carefully across the entire expanse of the solar system, over decades of patient, silent, and deeply paranoid preparation. The humans had never been hiding from the dark in fear. They had simply been waiting with infinite patience for the galaxy's most terrible monsters to finally step inside their cage. And Valoria, in all its blind, supreme arrogance, had proudly marched its entire military might right into the exact center of the trap. Floating aimlessly inside his localized atmospheric stasis bubble, Kalen thrashed against the zero-gravity environment. The shimmering dust of his former flagship drifted around him like mockingly beautiful snow. His tactical mind, previously shattered by the impossible quantum reflection, grasped violently for a single, desperate lifeline. His armor, though powered down to prevent dissolution, still housed a deeply embedded, independent quantum particle wave transmitter. It was a fail-safe designed for the absolute worst-case scenario, a direct, untraceable line to the capital planet of Valor Prime, located tens of thousands of light-years across the galaxy. With trembling clawed fingers, the alien commander tore away a chest plate and blindly smashed the emergency activation sequence. He did not care if the transmission burned out the last remaining power cells, keeping him warm. He needed the home guard. He needed the Emperor to dispatch the reserve dreadnoughts, to bring the full, unbridled wrath of the homeworld down upon this nightmare solar system. Emergency override. Kalen gasped his breath, fogging the inside of his stasis bubble. This is the Supreme Commander of the Vanguard. Total fleet neutralization. Requesting immediate quantum extraction and overwhelming reinforcements. Glory to the Emperor. The tiny device vibrated violently, establishing a microscopic singularity to punch the message across the galactic void. For an agonizing handful of seconds, there was nothing but the quiet hum of his failing life support. Then, a sharp chime echoed inside his helmet. A holographic projection burst forth from the chest emitter, painting a crisp, high-definition image directly in front of his eyes. Kalen let out a ragged sigh of relief, expecting to see the towering, terrifying visage of his immortal ruler, cloaked in the shadows of the Grand Palace. Instead, the image resolved to show the very heart of Valor Prime. It was the ancient throne room, a cavernous hall carved from the living obsidian core of the planet, a sacred sanctuary where no outsider had set foot in over 10 millennia. Yet, the Emperor was nowhere to be seen. Sitting comfortably on the jagged, imposing throne of the Valorian Empire was a human. He was an older man dressed in a crisp, immaculately tailored dark green military dress uniform, adorned with countless medals. His legs were casually crossed, and he rested one elbow on the armrest built from the skulls of conquered kings. Behind him, the impenetrable stained-glass windows of the palace were intact, but heavily armed human shock troopers in sleek, silent stealth armor were methodically patrolling the sacred dais, casually securing the perimeter. Transmission received loud and clear, Supreme Commander, the human general said. His voice was smooth-cultured and devoid of any hostility. It was the voice of a man who had already won the war before the enemy even realized it had started. I am General Vance of the United Earth Command. I apologize, but the Emperor is currently unavailable to take your call. He is undergoing a rather intensive debriefing in the lower holding cells. Kalen stopped breathing. His heart slammed against his ribs with enough force to crack them. His mind simply refused to process the visual information. The capital planet was an impenetrable fortress, guarded by planetary shields capable of withstanding gamma-ray bursts, and defended by automated defense grids that could track and annihilate a single dust mite entering the atmosphere. It was physically, mathematically, and strategically impossible for a primitive human strike force to be sitting in the throne room. Before Kalen could formulate a coherent thought, a secondary audio channel cracked open, and the familiar, irritatingly calm voice of Billy Baxter drifted into the communication feed. "Hey there, big guy," the mechanic chimed in, though his greasy face did not appear on the screen this time. "I see you finally made the call home. I hope you do not mind, but we kind of borrowed your front door key while you were busy trying to blow us up." "What is this?" Kalen whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of absolute denial and profound horror. "This is an illusion, a psychological weapon. Valor Prime is impregnable." "Nothing is impregnable if you leave the back door wide open," General Vance replied, smoothly from the throne, gesturing casually to the massive holographic map of the galaxy hovering above the palace floor. "You see, Kalen, humanity did not just randomly stumble upon quantum folding technology. We have been watching your glorious, bloodthirsty empire expand for well over 100 years. We saw how you operated. We saw your insatiable hunger for planetary cores. We knew eventually you would look at our little yellow sun and decide you wanted a taste." General Vance leaned forward, interlacing his fingers. "But we also knew we could never beat you in a conventional war of attrition. You had thousands of worlds, trillions of soldiers and resources we could barely fathom. So we decided not to fight you at all. We decided to simply switch places. Billy Baxter picked up the explanation, his tone sounding like a professor lecturing a particularly slow student. When your massive fleet of 5,000 ships fired up those dark matter drives to jump to our solar system, you created a massive tear in the fabric of space. You practically carved a four-dimensional highway directly from your heavily fortified homeworld right to our front porch. All we had to do was use our synchronized wormhole technology to catch your slipstream. The horrifying reality of the human strategy finally crashed down upon the alien commander. The entire human panic, the fake retreat, the desperate automated buoys, it had all been designed to ensure the Valorian fleet committed its absolute maximum force to the invasion. The humans wanted the Valorians to leave their homeworld almost entirely undefended, relying solely on their automated systems. The moment you jumped, General Vance continued, his eyes cold and calculating. Our entire cloaked stealth armada slipped into the exact same spatial tear, traveling in the opposite direction. We essentially rode your wake straight through your impenetrable planetary shields. Your automated defense grids were specifically calibrated to ignore the massive energy signature of your own departing fleet. We hid right inside that mathematical blind spot. And your fancy computer systems, Billy added with a dry chuckle. Your software is 1 billion years old. Sure, it is tough, but it is rigid. Our cyber warfare engineers cracked the primary mainframe of Valor Prime and completely disabled the planetary defense grid in precisely 4 minutes and 42 seconds. We did not fire a single shot. We did not drop a single bomb. We just walked right into your palace, politely asked the royal guard to drop their weapons, and took the keys to the kingdom. Kalen hung his head. The shimmering starlight outside his bubble felt bitterly cold now. The magnificent Valorian Empire, the scourge of the galaxy, the conqueror of 1,000 worlds, had been completely dismantled in less than an hour. They had not been outgunned. They had been outsmarted on a scale so vast it defied comprehension. You have no reinforcements coming, Kalen, General Vance said softly, the finality in his voice echoing like a closing vault door. You have no homeworld to return to. Your emperor is our prisoner. Your capital belongs to Earth, and your Grand Armada is currently floating as decorative stardust in our outer orbit. The 1,000-year-old Valorian Empire is officially homeless. The holographic transmission cut out abruptly, leaving Kalen alone in the suffocating silence of the void. He was no longer a supreme commander of a conquering army. He was just a vagabond drifting aimlessly in the dark, held captive in the very solar system he had sworn to destroy. Humanity had not simply survived the invasion. They had stolen the entire universe right out from under his feet. Deep within the heavily fortified lower holding cells of Valor Prime, the captured emperor adamantly refused to yield to his newly appointed human wardens. Driven by the fanatic madness that had sustained his royal bloodline for over 1,000 years, the alien ruler sneered, his golden eyes burning with a venomous, unyielding hatred. He clamped his mind onto a deeply hidden cybernetic neural implant buried at the base of his skull. With a sheer exertion of will, he violently triggered the Doomsday Protocol. Deep beneath the obsidian throne room, the massive planetary core destabilizer whined to life, preparing to crack the planet in half and instantly vaporize the human invasion force along with his own civilization. Across the galaxy, sitting in his cramped, aggressively humming orbital booth on the old anchor station, Billy Baxter let out a heavy, irritated groan. His archaic green diagnostic monitor suddenly flashed violently with the red warning signs of a planetary self-destruct sequence originating from the Valorian capital world. Billy did not panic. He did not even drop his piece of peppermint gum. He calmly reached out his grease-stained fingers, dancing across the rusty control board, and engaged a direct quantum tether straight to the molten core of Valor Prime. He calibrated the central temporal dial, grabbed a heavy physical iron lever on his left side, and smoothly pushed the localized flow of time backward by exactly 10 minutes. On the alien capital world, reality shuddered silently. The deafening apocalyptic alarms instantly swallowed their own echoes. The massive planetary core rapidly cooled down to its dormant state. The Emperor suddenly found his consciousness violently ripped backward, his treacherous thoughts completely erased before the impulse to activate the neural implant could even begin to form in his brain. Human shock troopers, acting on a localized delayed warning alert sent by Billy, swiftly breached the cell and tranquilized the alien ruler before he could even blink. With their emperor thoroughly sedated and their ultimate weapon utterly neutralized, the final ember of Valorian resistance was permanently extinguished. Yet, humanity did not follow the ancient, brutal galactic tradition of slaughter and retribution. There were absolutely no mass executions in the palace courtyards. The Earth Council immediately broadcasted a universal forced peace treaty across all known frequencies. The terms were absolute and profoundly humiliating for a proud warrior race, yet they dripped with a radical, unfathomable mercy. Humanity understood that true power was not demonstrated by the ability to shatter a world, but by the supreme capacity to heal one. The Valorian Empire was strictly ordered to surrender their deep, core mining vessels. Furthermore, they were legally forced to share their highly advanced ecological terraforming technology, previously used to strip planets bare, and deploy it to actively restore the hundreds of dead worlds they had ruthlessly ravaged over the centuries. Suspended safely in the orbital space of the Sol system, Supreme Commander Kalen sat quietly in a comfortably furnished holding cell aboard a human medical frigate. He stared silently out the thick, reinforced glass window. Outside, thousands of human engineers in bright yellow hazard suits were cheerfully swarming over the deactivated husks of his glorious, pitch-black dreadnoughts. They were not studying the terrible weapons of war. Kalen watched in profound disbelief as the humans aggressively dismantled the dark matter drives and plasma cannons violently welding massive solar energy arrays onto the ancient armor. They were casually hollowing out the missile bays to construct massive, floating hydroponic civilian farming stations and orbital habitats. His terrifying armada was being turned into a peaceful neighborhood. News of the spectacular event rippled across the cosmos faster than light itself. Every intelligent species in the known galaxy froze in absolute terrified awe. The most brutal, terrifyingly efficient expansionist empire in recorded galactic history had been utterly dismantled in barely 1 single hour. And the victorious human race had accomplished this mathematically impossible feat with absolutely zero casualties on their side. Back on the dark side of the moon, Billy Baxter let out a massive jaw-cracking yawn. He flipped down the protective metal covers on his rusty control board, turned off the flickering green monitor, and tossed his empty coffee thermos into a worn canvas duffel bag. He grabbed his heavy steel wrench, tossed it in alongside the thermos, and zipped the bag shut with a sharp pull. Billy keyed his radio communicator one last time. "Old Anchor Station is powering down for the night. Control, please tell my wife to keep the backyard grill hot. I am already running 20 minutes late, and if my ribeye steak is overcooked because I had to save the galaxy from a bunch of angry space bugs, I am going to be severely annoyed." He cycled. The airlock stepped into his rusty transport skiff and ignited the chemical thrusters. As his small, battered ship puttered slowly back toward the glowing blue marble of Earth, the rest of the galaxy quietly stepped into a brand new era, resting safely under the watchful, terrifyingly brilliant protection of humanity. Thank you so much, our wonderful listeners, for staying with us until the very end of this incredible journey. We would love to know where in this vast world you are tuning in from, so please let us know your location in the comments below. If you enjoyed today's story and want to help us keep this universe alive, please consider supporting us with just $1. You can easily do this by scanning the PayPal QR code currently on your screen, or by using the PayPal link provided in the description and pinned comment. Your generous support is exactly what allows us to pay our dedicated team, help them feed their families, and ensure we can continue creating more amazing sci-fi stories for you. Thank you for your kindness, and we will see you in the next adventure.